Let's do another start so we don't have that there. Hello and welcome to another episode of Connecting with Kinetic. Today I have with me Cory Huebner from LWorks, one of Kinetic's wonderful partners. How are you today, Cory?
I'm good. I'm doing great. How are you, Jake?
Terrible. But you know, we soldier on. We keep going. So who are you? Fill us in a little bit on your background and how did you end up working in Web3, the craziest, most chaotic place possible?
Yeah. So I am a software engineer for LWorks, and how I got here. So I've been a software engineer for like 15 years now, and done a lot of work as a consultant during that time. So writing software for other companies and sort of short-term projects. So short-term being like 1 to 3 years projects, like that's considered short-term in like the enterprise contracting space. So over that time, I got to see a lot of different customers and a lot of different like problems they're trying to solve. And over that time, I noticed that all of these problems started moving towards this space of more easily accessible data, like data that's secure, but also like I can get to it from anywhere. And also like less hand-holding of infrastructure, like less spinning up my own machines to manage my software, and less manual deployment of software and all of that. So like that led me into like the cloud space. So I spent about 6 years as a cloud architect. So working on building people software in the cloud, whether that's AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, like all those spaces, right? Just building software out in the cloud. And then sort of like the Web3 space during this time was on the rise. And I think that lean towards the cloud is what kind of showed me, like, I think the new trajectory is to use these Web3 infrastructures so that one, my data is like completely accessible. I can get to it and it's transparent and anyone can look at it. You know, that's important for the sake of transparency. And then also a lot of the infrastructure costs that, you know, were put away when you went to the public cloud, even more so when you go to like the Web3 space, less of that managing my own database, managing all of my own, you know, ingestion process and all of that. So that's what led me to where I am now. And then I think where we are right now as LWorks is we're in this space where we provide risk and observability tools on various different chains. That's where we are today.
Backing up a bit from the tech aspect, how do you feel about Web3 today versus how you felt maybe a few years ago?
So a few years ago, I was just barely in the space. And I think part of what I've learned today is that it's very it's less magic after looking into it for 3 years. You know, there's less things that just you learn about the nitty-gritty details of what's in an ERC-20 contract or something like that, and you learn about like it's just a bunch of functions with conventions behind them about how they're named. So like peeling away some of those layers of like what used to look magic, now it's like, oh, very clear what it is. And I think the other thing that I've seen in the Web3 space is because it's all very like convention driven, is that, you know, given you can make a contract that can do whatever you want to do in a lot of these EVM type chains, I've learned that it's also really difficult to wrangle all the data, because anybody can spin up any contract for like, take, you know, an ERC-20 type contract, but you could totally just fork that contract and add your own special sauce to that contract. So I've learned that it's not as controlled as I once thought it was. It's very wild as far as like what you can put into a contract, because it's free. You know, you can put whatever you want into a contract, which it's a double-edged sword where it's great that you can put whatever you want into it, but also it makes it really hard to monitor or to like know really what's going on inside of a blockchain.
And some bad things can happen.
For sure.
Which brings us to security.
Yeah.
So how will LWorks be supporting Kinetic?
Yeah, so we are, there's there's a lot going on, but maybe like two main fronts from a day-to-day perspective. There is the risk parameters. That's what we refer to them as. I know there's a lot of verbiage for this, but it's like with Kinetic being a lending platform, you need to define some parameters on how you're lending, right? Like I need to define a collateral factor that says whenever I provide 2 wrapped Ethereum or 2, whatever token, how much can I actually borrow? That's a collateral factor, right? So we're providing these risk parameters. Collateral factor is an example, but there's lots of risk parameters. So our job is to look at all of the data available on a token's volatility and the general lending pool profile and figure out what these risk parameters should be set to. What's the collateral factor on token XYZ? That's one front, is the risk parameters that you define up front. So there's those that you define up front that help with the success of your lending pool over time. Adoption, also it's helpful for, the sake of getting borrowers to come online and actually use your protocol. If you set your collateral factor too low, nobody's going to want to borrow because, they're having to give lots of one token just to borrow another. So there's that. And then there's the other front, which is, okay, now after we've set these factors and we're live, how do we make sure things are working like we expect? How do we make sure nothing's going off the rails? Example being utilization rate, right? We want to make sure that we're the pool, the amount of borrows and lends is in a happy balance, so that the borrowers that want to come in can borrow, and lenders that want to come out of the pool at any point in time can pull their money out of the pool. So there's that utilization rate, which is an example of that's not something you set beforehand. That's something you just observe over time as people are using your pool or leaving your pool, right? So we provide the monitoring tools that watch the chain. So we'll be watching the Flare chain, and we'll be taking all that data out. We ingest it into a time series database, and then what we can do with that is we can tell you in real time, hey, is my utilization rate going above or below a threshold in which I deem healthy for the protocol, and then you can react accordingly. And those are the two main fronts. I think there's other aspects of just general, risk assessment, security around making sure that, things like our keys protected. Are we storing our keys in a safe way? They're not, sitting on somebody's box, easily grabbable. There's things like that are they're all important to security. But those two main ones are the ones that I listed out before. So that's where I
always make sure to keep my keys on my Google Drive. That's the safest place.
The safest place. Yep. And you can share them with whoever you want, whenever. Just hit that share.
Yeah. You just grab them from there. I think I title it tax forms. So nobody will open that.
Nice.
Too boring. So you touched on it a bit, but can you go a bit more into detail on how exactly LWorks predicts, detects, and responds to anomalies in blockchain transactions?
Yeah. So what we do is we ingest all transactions coming off of a chain. So anything that goes through the Flare blockchain, we ingest it. What we do is then it's being ingested in real time. So as transactions are happening, we're just ingesting them live. And then what we do is we split them apart into what we consider useful metrics. So this is the hard part, right? It's coming through in real time. And these contracts, like we mentioned earlier, it can be whatever. So we have to now extract metrics out of those. So there's some really common metrics, for a transaction. Transactions all have a value field, how much of the native coin was this for? But then there's also there's smaller nuance around this contract has this function that was called with this parameter. We want to record a metric for that too, so we can detect anomalies in this parameter value. For example, a transfer function, we want to make sure that the transferred recipient is not on some sanction list, or the transfer value is not way out of band from what we normally see. And if it is, it might be okay. We just want to alert you when that happens, so that something out of the norm happened. And maybe just backing up a step. So we ingest it, we read it, and then the other key is that we then put it into a time series database. We put it in an efficient time series format so that we can not just look at the event as it's happening, but also look at the event relative to all the other events of that type that happened in the past, which that's kind of a key differentiation between what we do. And I think a lot of monitoring systems do is they're usually looking at the current event. We take that event and we can compare it in real time to events in the past and get a kind of a profile on what a token or an event or, an account is typically doing. And then we can detect what's out of band from norm.
So one thing that would be interesting to know is, how do you see the services that LedgerWorks offers evolving or improving over time? Do you have anything that you're planning to add, or any kind of integrations with Kinetic that you'd like to offer that people might not immediately know about?
Yeah. So I think right now, kind of an interesting one is this idea. So we have this dashboard that you come into, which is sort of like, as a user of our platform, you can see the important metrics to you. So like there'll be dashboard panels targeted right at Kinetic type metrics, like around the pools and the tokens being lent upon. So right now, the way we do that is, we create those dashboards and we will deliver them to, whoever, whoever we're working with. So it would be delivered to Kinetic in this example, right? But we're adding this notion of public and shareable dashboards. So I think that'll be useful for just generally across the broader community where, if you have access, you, Jake, have access to a dashboard, you could potentially say, I want somebody else to be able to look at this dashboard. This is the type of data that I think I want others to see, or I can even make it public. Like I want everyone to see this data, depending on, exactly what we're looking at. There's a happy medium between, as we build these monitoring tools to really like sort of digest your protocol and understand what's happening in there. There's this happy medium where you may not want to like have everything that we're digesting publicly, shared with everyone. It might, one, not be useful to the public, or two, might just be something that's useful for your business as far as, these types of metrics. But then there's some metrics that it's like, I want everyone to know what our collateral factors have been over time, for example. That's an example of, you can see over time collateral factors. So that's kind of a cool one, the sharing of rules. So right now, it's very targeted. Whoever is using our platform can see those rules, but we're going to open it up so that you can share those. That's kind of
cool.
And
you're not only working with Kinetic, right? You've worked with another lending protocol, right?
That's right. We do. We have a couple of other lending protocols we work with, and we're building this in such a way that we can, have these common rules that lending protocols in general use, and then we have these specific rules that maybe just Kinetic wants. That would be the idea, is where we can sort of tailor it to something that hits the special sauce of Kinetic in a metric, or another lending protocol, and so on. Just allowing us to have like an easy way to spin up this sort of like canned set of rules that a lending platform would need, or a DEX or whatever, whatever your protocol is, have these canned rules, and then also be able to tailor it to be very specific to what you need.
Right. Well, Kinetic obviously hasn't launched yet, but
Yeah.
You have been working with other lending protocols. Were there any challenges or things that you faced that were unexpected?
I think that it definitely opened up some of the complexities of operating a lending protocol. There's so many different variables that are important. So like that idea of like a canned set of rules, I think those are very helpful for like to just get off the ground and being able to like see what's happening in my platform. But I think that the complexity lies in those tailored rules, where it's something very particular and often requiring a decent amount of real-time math. Like it's like a decent amount of like, it's not as straightforward. When I go to when I go to a lending pool's dash or UI, you might see a control on there that is like, here's my total amount available for borrowing, right? Seems straightforward enough, but like under the hood, that's actually doing a decent amount of like stitching together a bunch of different inputs and putting them out as one single thing that's like, here's the amount that's available for borrowing. So I think in regards to real-time monitoring, we need to also do a lot of that in our rules to make sure that we're accurately measuring the thing you care about being notified on.
kind of backing up to a more general perspective, what would you say you're most excited about regarding the future of blockchain?
Most excited about?
Well, you're not. I can guarantee you're not completely satisfied with how things are right now.
Yeah,
no one.
For sure. I think as things like our platform and then maybe like Flare in general, Flare as a chain is a good instance of where we're starting to make some of these things that are really that they can appear very complex when you look down in the weeds of the smart contract. Like the goal of the blockchains, and a lot of times is like, I have a great audit trail of history, and it's also easy for me to look at it and understand what's happening. Like I want to be able to look at something and use what I know to actually figure out, make good decisions about what I'm going to do with, a token or whatever, right? I think that Flare, with like the time series oracles and like the ability to bring on tokens like Bitcoin that aren't like ERC20 tokens, it's simplifying that process a little bit. And I think we're trying to do the same, where I think in the future, a lot of this, there's this wild west of like, you can do anything with a smart contract, but we're building more tooling on top of that so that we can make decisions more quickly, and also just have actually look at it and understand it through this tooling. Like I can actually start making intelligent decisions without having to like deconstruct a protocol just to understand what's happening. So I think that as we're iterating in Web3 and the blockchain space in general, it's like people are building more and more tooling to help make these really complicated things less complicated and accessible for everyone.
A personal question I have that I'm always interested to know when I'm talking to somebody who actually knows how blockchains work. Do you do a lot of investing in cryptocurrencies in general?
I personally don't, but a lot of that's been, sort of my relatively new, and like I'm a few years into this space. Partially also in a personal realm, just like I don't do a lot of investing in general. Just in general, not a lot of investing outside of like my retirement. That's just I think it's a matter of, in life, I have a family and 4 kids. So it's like, I spend a lot of time. I wish I spent more time, trying to make my money work for me, but I don't, there's other priorities. So it's not necessarily.
No, I mean, it's interesting. That's what I figured your response would be. Because usually when I talk to people who actually work and develop and are very familiar with how blockchain technology works, they're not super concerned with investing in cryptocurrency, which is, it's just that imbalance is just an interesting thing to me. The less you know, it seems, the more you're willing to throw a bunch of money in, which is very funny. And part of the appeal of the space to me is just like the chaos and the imbalances that exist.
Yeah. There's great opportunity and also great risk. It's both.
That's the name of the game, baby. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was a very informative discussion. Hopefully, it wasn't too highbrow for our listeners. I think most of them have very large, veiny, throbbing brains.
Right.
So I think they'll get a handle on it.
Yeah, cool.
Partway, I started just doing a coloring book, but I think they'll keep their attention. But yes, thank you so much for joining us on Connecting with Kinetic. Excited to be working with you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Jake.